about the times you have tried to map out complex connections between people, interactions, or systems? It gets overwhelming fast, right? Now, that's where graph databases come in. Unlike traditional databases that struggle with highly interconnected data, graph databases excel in visualizing relationships, making them a game changer for modern data challenges. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Analytics Insight podcast, where we talk about the ever evolving tech space. And I'm your host, Priya Dialani. Now, as industries prioritize dynamic and real time insights, the shift towards a graph based systems is no longer optional, it is necessary. Whether it's for recommendation engines, fraud detection, or mastering supply chain intricacies, more data engineers are leaning into this transformative tech to build smarter and faster solutions. Today's episode is about a deeper dive into graph databases, and let's welcome Kristen Pimpini, also known as KP, Vice President and General Manager for Neo4j Asia Pacific region. Hi KP, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you? Pretty nice to meet you, and thank you for taking the time out to have a conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, KP. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today. And of course, when we have had a lot of discussions in podcasts around emerging technologies, some of the cutting edge technologies, how they're impacting the business. But I think today we are going to have a very technical discussion about, graph databases. To be honest, even I think even I don't have much knowledge about graph databases, and I'm really keen to, have this interesting conversation with you today. So, I think without a further ado, let's get started and let's
Yes.
start by knowing more about, the company. So, if you could help us understand more about Neo4j, its specialization, it would be great.
Yeah, look, no problem. And thank you. And hello to all the listeners. Neo4j is the graph intelligence platform that transforms data into knowledge to power the next generation of intelligent applications and AI systems. That's a mouthful. And realistically, what does it mean? And ultimately, what it does mean is there's a gap between how real data operates in the digital world, especially, because there's a considerable number of hierarchies and paths and journeys and things like that. And it's really about how companies organize their data. And ultimately, that means the data, this type of data, traditional data sets that we've seen over the years, they're not ready for AI or any of these intelligent applications that we've been, that we're all seeing booming right now. And ultimately, what we need to be able to do is unlock that. And that is one of the key things that Neo4j does today. As a knowledge graph, we transform data into knowledge. With the knowledge graph, it unifies the silos and connects structured and unstructured and semi-structured data. So modeling the real world entity relationships from a graph perspective and really ensuring that it reduces things like hallucinations, which is a really big thing from an LLM perspective, and it also helps build in governance and helps things like access controls and trust and things like that, that what we're seeing a lot of organizations struggle as they start to enter into the world of AI, really. And so what we're seeing today is we solve extremely complex use cases around the world, things like fraud detection, so supply chain optimization. We help with the customer 360, which is extremely important. We help people from drug discovery and uncovering patterns, and that's all done through our graph database. And we achieve in some instances up to 1,000 times faster from a query perspective than a traditional relational database. And a relational database is typically columns and rows, and a graph database has a considerable amount of flexibility.
Great. Thank you for that insightful overview, KP. And I'm really glad to understand, about Neo4j and how, the company's graph intelligence platform is being used currently to solve some extremely complex use cases. And of course, you mentioned some of the use cases, and I would, of course, would like to dive deeper into more elaboration about these use cases. But before that, we would also like to know more about you. You have over 20 years of experience in sales and transformational leadership, and you have successfully led technology companies across Australia, New Zealand, and Asia Pacific. So, we want to know more about you, KP. How has the journey been till date? and what exactly is your role and contribution at Neo4j currently?
Thank you. Yes, you said 20, and every time I look at the year, it's getting more and more. It's more than 25 years across the broader APAC. And, it's look, right now at Neo4j, it's a very exciting journey to be able to lead this amazing team. I've been in tech for a considerable amount of time. I've worked in semiconductor industries. I've worked in the customer experience industries, selling a range of different software and leading a range of different teams. I joined Neo4j at the start of 2024, coming into the business to really help us accelerate the growth across Asia Pacific, where I've got a considerable amount of experience, not just managing a business and helping sales teams drive a go-to-market strategy, but more importantly, help the teams grow and continue to invest. At Neo4j, we've created a considerable platform across the three main theatres of Australia, New Zealand, across ASEAN, and then India as well, and have been investing considerably, not in just into our customers, but also into our people. We're looking for some and have been continuing to look and hire some of the top talent across the market, people who have got considerable technical background and some people who have got very deep understanding of the theatres, so we can actually drive and be culturally aligned to those markets and ensure that we serve our customers accordingly. We've been working with a range of different customers, considerable, large enterprise logos, as well as public sector across all three theatres. And over the last 18 months have invested considerably into the Indian market, where it's growing at an exponential rate for us, which is really exciting. The adoption of graph and knowledge graph databases has been immense. We're growing at close to the fastest region across Neo4j, which is extremely exciting. We're also ensuring that we invest in our engineering team, and we invest in that from a deployment perspective to be able to best support our customers, ensure that they leverage and see value immediately from our technology. I've been, I was a salesperson from many years back, but leadership is a passion of mine. Nothing excites me more than seeing our broader team succeed as individuals and as a collective. And at the moment, we're overperforming for the region. It's a very exciting team, and I'm looking forward to continuous investments from the business and executing on that as we move forward.
That's really insightful, KP. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm really happy to hear how your role has evolved and the kind of impact you have been able to create within the organization. Now, speaking of which, that brings me, to our next discussion. Of course, we have been talking about graph databases, and they are gaining attention for their ability to handle intricate relationships in a way that traditional databases simply can't. Now, a relational database might feel like a tightly packed grid, while graph databases are like a mind map. It's fluid, it's interconnected, and easy to navigate. And if we are working in fields like social networking or fraud detection, like you mentioned, I think understanding graph databases isn't optional anymore. So we want to understand from you, KP, why do you think, apart from the things that I've mentioned, graph databases are gaining traction now, especially in the context of data-driven enterprises?
I think, every year we become more and more connected, and, our world is extremely connected. To think, just how easily we can tap into anywhere around the world is just amazing, really, compared to when I started in the industry. And so with that connection, so should our data be as well. And however, the data, as I said at the top of the call, our data isn't organized like that today, right? So, we need to really understand, how we actually create these connections. And it's ultimately an impossible task, as the volume of data and metadata increases and becomes more and more connected. With graph databases, we recognize that the relationships are everywhere, and they optimize every layer in our architecture, completely around connected data. So this way of thinking is sort of how our brains work, how the world ultimately works. and how our data should work in transforming insights and knowledge. So enabling organizations to achieve like better insights, advance innovation, enable solutions of, things like humanity's, biggest challenges, right? And essentially include the Gen AI. And the Gen AI, the rise of it right now and the demands connecting, these models with a company's private data to improve performance. Knowledge graphs provide the necessary context to understand this data. And the context is that there, context to understand is absolutely critical. So it's making Gen AI results more accurate and relevant. We've just launched InfiniGraph. It's the most recent innovation for the business to eliminate data silos by fusing real-time operational analytical workloads. And graph databases store relationships natively, offering efficient data transferring and access to millions and millions of connections per second.
That's definitely an interesting perspective, KP. Thank you for sharing that. And I believe that, graph databases seem to be bridging a very crucial gap wherein they are allowing organizations to connect the dots between data points in a very far more intuitive and dynamic way. And of course, when we have something that is giving out some necessary context, which earlier was difficult to, figure out, it is definitely much needed, especially when we are moving in an era where, we are being directed and where we are having a future more Gen AI focused. So let's build on that, KP. I think when we are talking about, graph databases, I think they grow, connect, and reveal patterns as networks become denser and more dynamic. And I think this flexibility makes graph analytics incredibly powerful for AI and machine learning applications, where understanding the context around data is just as critical as understanding the data itself. So, can you share some real world use cases where graph analytics has delivered unique insights? You mentioned about fraud detection and supply chain optimization. Could you elaborate more on that or any other, use case you think will make sense for our listeners?
Yeah, look, it's two that stick out, and they're fantastic. I mean, from Neo4j's perspective, we work with some of the leading companies across BFSI, pharmaceutical, pharma, supply chain, retail, public sector, in India and across the globe, to be honest. But if you think of like one example is the BT Group, right? Who they consolidated roughly 350 plus IT systems into a single digital twin. They're cutting capacity planning time by up to about 50%, achieved a 60% reduction in human decision points, freeing up their engineers to focus on the higher value work. So, and that improved, performance thousandfold, enabling, much faster delivery and significant cost savings for them. And I mean, you think of, how big the BT Group is, and it's a fantastic company that we're working with and customer, and very important to our business. Another great example of that could be, Transport for London. They built a real-time digital twin that cut congestion by an estimated 10%. The saving London $750 million annually. So a fantastic ROI, leveraging Neo4j and Graph. It improved incident detection, which is, I suppose probably even more important than any financial ROI, preventing delays that cost up to, $14,000 per minute, and delivering a better, a commuter experience, saving each driver roughly $1,500 worth of time per year. So these are real life examples that we have that we typically share when we're talking with, prospective customers and understanding, how we can better support them and also help them on their journey with Neo4j.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, KP. And it's really incredible, by listening to these use cases that how graph analytics can uncover those hidden connections and patterns that once upon a time, traditional data models often miss. I think, whether it's exposing fraud networks or making supply chains more resilient, this ability to visualize relationships at a scale can truly transform decision making. And of course, it also puts into context that how interconnected data when we have can drive a smarter, faster, and more value-driven outcomes across industries, some of the industries which we just spoke about.
Yes.
Of course, when you're talking about graph databases, it's very difficult to keep AI out of it. I mean, I think when we talk about graph databases, they have truly emerged as a very transformative force, and wherein organizations can dive deep into this interconnected data pool and extract valuable insights. So I think when you talk about the power of it, it lies in its ability to capture and navigate, analyze relationships, which can empower businesses to enhance their operational models and ensure that their goals are achieved more accurately. So, with the rise of AI and machine learning, how do graph databases fit into the modern analytics stack?
Just to, before I answer that, and I'll quickly get back to your question, but just on a key point, we just had our Graph Summit, which is one of our flagship events here in Bangalore yesterday, which was attended by hundreds of customers, partners. It was a fantastic event, but everybody, without fail, everybody was wanting to understand how does Neo4j knowledge graph database fit in, with the rise of AI. And frankly, knowledge graphs are bringing more accurate responses. They're giving rich context and explainability to each Gen AI model interaction. By combining knowledge graphs with your native vector search, you get the best of both worlds, which is a graph RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which I'm sure many of the listeners have heard of. So unlike traditional relational databases, which are optimized for structured tabular data, graph databases are purpose-built to model and analyze relationships and connections between data points. So this makes them especially relevant in today's environment where insights, often lie not just in the data itself, but in how entities are actually connected. So I'm not sure if you saw, but Neo4j recently announced a $100 million investment to accelerate our position as the default knowledge layer for agentic systems, which was with for being in the organization for a couple of years. This is just such a monumental moment for us, such a great level of investment. And it really helps with that, critical infrastructure for Gen AI. The investment was going to fund, product innovation. It's also going to include two new agentic offerings and ultimately the launch of one of the largest startup programs for AI native companies to date. So supporting over 1,000 startups worldwide over the next 12 months. On this startup program that we launched, we're already seeing considerable uptake of that with over 200 companies already signing up to this fantastic new program. So we're trusted by, 84, I think it is, of the Fortune 100 and more than half of the Fortune 500. And we power autonomous agentic deployments at Uber, Walmart, Klarna, and others. I think you're probably seeing these articles, and I'm sure your listeners have, and providing structured memory, relationships, and context needed for agents for reason. In the last 12 months, Neo4j has seen close to a 5 to 6x growth in Gen AI customers, and that's only growing. Every time I see one of the reports that come out, that's accelerating, which is really exciting. We've got 58% revenue growth in cloud consumption, 82% growth in our PLG, our product-led growth, which is really exciting as well, where people are, logging in and capitalizing on Neo4j's platform. And then 56% of it's top 100 customers have increased their footprint with us, which is, this is across just 2025. So, we're starting to see so much momentum, behind, Gen AI, which is great. And what it ultimately does is people are seeing, the power of Gen AI. They're starting to understand that, especially with GraphRag, but it also is then getting them to pivot and also leverage us for ultimately many of the traditional use cases that we've seen grow Neo4j to the size it is today.
Definitely. And I think, I really liked what you said that, when you're trying to integrate graph database in an AI era world, I think, we are getting the best of both worlds. And I think that's where it's very important that, we have all the data points themselves and we are able to make sense of it and make AI models more accurate and more precise, and ensuring that we are able to uncover hidden patterns and insights that traditional relation systems which usually would miss. Speaking of that, I think when we're talking about the interconnected approach that knowledge graphs and graph databases have, they are fantastic, I think, when it comes out to mapping relationships, but I think they are not a one size fits all solution. mean, like any other technology, they also come with its own set of challenges and limitations. So whether it's fitting them into the existing systems or grappling with distinct query languages, these roadblocks can't be ignored. So what are certain challenges organizations will have to keep in mind while integrating, graph databases in their existing systems?
Yeah, I think from what we're seeing is, one of the most important things that I see is that it's about pace, right? And so we're seeing a lot of customers tackle internal use cases right now, where they're looking to prove, the concepts or, get a Gen AI application off the ground. And they're doing that in a manner where I feel like it's less threatening to their business and being consumer facing versus it being, internal, where if there is an error or there are some areas that they need to lean in on and improve on, they definitely are using that as their proof of concept. Let's just say we're starting to see this on a considerable basis. With regards to awareness, one of the things that we do is workshops with our customers. We understand where their data sits, how their data, is currently structured today, what other applications that we may or may not need to integrate into, and they need to, take all these things into consideration and ensure that, to be frank, is consult with some of our experts. And what we're seeing with that is having people on the ground, especially here in India, which is awesome. We're seeing a considerable amount of acceleration with many of these programs to date. And so each example and each use case that we see, this is not something that, typically is we replicate. It's typically, at this case, bespoke. And the main reason is because every customer's data is different and their goals and, objectives are different as well. And so as we start to build with some of the investments that I've talked about and some of these other solutions continue, or as our product continues to evolve, we'll continue to educate our customers and ensure that they get, the right technical help to be able to help them execute on their goals.
Absolutely. And I think, integrating graph databases can indeed be a very complex journey. And the points that you highlighted or shared, I think it's very important that we look beyond just the technology and also focus on the readiness, whether it's data modeling, scalability, or even aligning teams to a new way of thinking. And I think it's not just about adopting a graph tech, it's about reshaping the way businesses think about data connection. And I think that starts internally within the teams where stakeholders are involved. The leadership also plays a very important role here. So I think it's all hands on deck where we need to have that change management in place also. Great. So, one last question for you, KP. We have discussed everything about graph databases, and I think though the insights shared by you are incredible. But one last question, looking ahead, what innovations in graph technology excites you the most? And, how do you think the future will be like?
What the future looks like is a very tough one right now, I think, for us all. But it's exciting. And to your point on change management, I think that is a key thing. I don't think that AI applications are going to make things. We're going to be able to accelerate. I think it's going to complement, and I'm very excited. Closer to 30 years in getting now into the 30, closer to 30 years in the industry. I'm more excited than ever. Things are moving at a rapid rate, and great to be part of it. But looking ahead, I suppose the future of graph, is promising as innovations continue from our perspective at the database level, at the compute engines, and throughout really the whole ecosystem. From our visualization, dashboarding, and other connectors that we're building, these advancements aim to make graph really valuable yet seamlessly integrated across IT infrastructure. What I'm ultimately, most excited about is the adoption, and the adoption that comes from awareness. And one of the things that I love, we've talked a lot about, Gen AI, but it is, really accelerating the awareness of knowledge graph and the power of it. Neo4j has been around for 15 years. It's a very successful company. It's got extremely robust technology, but getting it into the hands of developers and really seeing them grow and building out use cases just continues to excite me, and so many different types of use cases. And so I'm really excited from that perspective. And then lastly, I think I'd end on, to answer this question, is actually seeing customers be able to deploy consumer facing AI solutions in market where they're seeing considerable ROI, based off Neo4j. That to me is, and we're seeing this now. This is happening, as I said, we're getting that acceleration across many customers, but seeing it at scale, it's going to just be fantastic and really thrilled to be here and to be part of this journey.
Definitely, KP. And I think our listeners too will be excited to be a part of this journey. And as we move forward into a future driven by interconnectedness, embracing the graph database revolution is paramount. And the projected market growth and the gradual adoption of graph databases testify to their potential to transform industries, unlock innovation, and drive informed decision making. And by harnessing these capabilities, like graph databases specifically, organizations are in a much better position to unravel hidden patterns, discover new connections, and gain a competitive edge. Thank you so much, KP, for taking out the time and effort to be on a podcast today and helping us understand that with the rise of AI and machine learning, having tools and systems like graph databases will become more of a strategic advantage. So, the faster organizations can adopt and integrate into the systems, the better the competitive advantage they'll have. Thank you so much, KP, for your insights. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you, Priya. Much appreciated. Have a great day. Thank you.
You too, KP. Thank you. So, this is for our listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion around graph databases, and please share it within your network and help us know what other topic you would like us to host a podcast on. Until then, you can view all our previous podcasts on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.